It really does break my heart when people lose decades of their lives to bad spiritual teachings. Sometimes people tell me about them and ask me about their experiences, and I have to explain why the path they were on for the last 20 years wasn't a good fit for what they actually wanted to achieve, was never going to be able to deliver that. So I'm going to share with you 3 ways to identify bad spiritual teachings so that you can avoid them and the problems they bring and save yourself precious years. And for one of these 3 bad ways, the cost in years is doubled. I've been an integral philosopher since 2006, which means being able to take an integral view of spirituality. That means seeing more perspectives and getting the full big picture. The Kissing Consciousness logo is even a representation of the 4 quadrants of Ken Wilber's integral theory. Wilber, incidentally, has a valuable and simple message about spiritual paths that I think you'll like. So here are the 3 bad spiritual teachings to avoid. The first bad spiritual teaching is magical thinking, and this is further confused by something called the pre-trans fallacy. This magical thinking type of spiritual teaching is something that I experienced myself 20 years ago. But here's a common experiment. On the screen you can see a red ball and a blue ball. But imagine if you had a ball that was half red and half blue. Now if you give this to a child of approximately 3 years of age and you allow them to examine the ball, what happens in your experiment is you can hold it up so that the blue side is facing the child and the red side is facing you. And then if you ask the child what colour they're looking at, they're going to say blue. If you then ask the child what colour you're looking at, they're also going to say blue because they haven't taken that perspective. Whereas if you do that same experiment with a child of about 5 years old, because they've learned to take perspectives of other people, they'll be able to recognise that even though they're seeing blue, that the side that you're seeing is red. This is an early stage of development of perspective taking, and virtually all adults are capable of taking this perspective, having learnt to do so earlier in their young lives. But some then regress and get sucked back into pre-rational thinking. When a child moves and the moon seems to move with them, it isn't following them. This is the stage of development that believes in the tooth fairy and that Santa is real. But in personal development circles, it can be subtler and more compelling than that to adults. Magical thinking forms of spiritual teaching are often built upon the idea that the world revolves around you. This is a different, egocentric view to that of unity spirituality or universal oneness. Another common saying of it is, it's just a belief, designed to denounce all other aspects of reality and turn self, culture and nature into just self. It sometimes denounces such things as the laws of physics, such as calories, or the will of others in relationships. There is no such thing as relationships if you think you create your own reality, because who or what are you relating with? Only yourself. It's no more a relationship than I had with my toy soldiers when I was 5, or a car enthusiast has with his car. You can eat what you want because calories are just a belief? I tried that 20 years ago. You get fat. Similarly, I approached relationships from the same worldview. It ends badly. So what's the pre-trans fallacy? Well, first you have to understand transpersonal awareness. In logic, a subject is defined as that which is aware of an object. So you can be aware of your body as an object. You can also be aware of your thoughts and emotions and belief systems as objects, which means therefore you can be aware of both your whole body and your whole mind as objects. This allows you to become aware of your individual ego self as an object. This is transpersonal awareness because you've transcended identifying directly with your body and your mind, your body, mind, ego self. That's a great achievement in the development of self-awareness. Now compare that to pre-rational magical thinking. Imagine you won a medal at the Olympics and you then told me that it wasn't a silver medal. I might then say, well then it must have been a bronze medal. But you might reply to me quite reasonably, well hang on a second, how do you know it wasn't a gold medal? And we could do that the other way around. If you told me you'd won a medal that wasn't a silver medal, and I say, well it must be a gold medal then, you might say, well hang on a second, how do you know it wasn't a bronze medal? So we can see that we can confuse a bronze medal with a gold medal, or a gold medal with a bronze medal, simply because they're not silver medals. Now if you consider that in the light of genuine transpersonal awareness versus pre-rational magical thinking, then you might be able to see where we're going with this. This results in either reductionism or elevationism, where we're reducing genuine transpersonal spiritual awareness to the pre-rational level, or we're elevating pre-rational magical thinking to those of genuine transcendence and spiritual awareness. So we can see the challenge it is to get into genuine spiritual understanding without getting into magical thinking, because you have to sort the wheat from the chaff. You have to separate the pre-rational from the transpersonal. The second type of bad spiritual teaching relates to the biggest distinction in all of personal development, self-help, spiritual teaching, conscious living, and all of that. It's to be found everywhere in the industry, and it's the failure to integrate spiritual teaching with the shadow, so we need to know what that means. I've collected 3 wisdom quotes that explain the difference between spirit and shadow very incisively. The shadow is that part of your personality that is unacceptable to the people around you throughout your life, and so, to protect you, your subconscious buries it away, and to that degree you create and then live through a false self. This creates incongruence, being at odds with yourself. The shadow also lives in the physical flesh, in the nervous system, as science has shown. So when we reclaim those personality aspects, we need to be addressing the body as well as the mind. So the false self of the shadow is a somewhat different kind of false self to those defined in spiritual meanings. We were lucky back in the day, circa 2008, when we used to travel to London to attend something called an Integral Life Practice group. Integral Life Practice has 4 core modules: mind, body, spirit, and shadow, and we do half an hour of exercises of each module. So we were all very clear that there was a difference between the spirit module and the shadow module. And because that distinction was clear to us, we knew not to buy into any ego-transcending, absolutistic forms of spiritual teaching, where transcending ego is all and everything and the shadow is disregarded. Ego transcendence has its place, but absolutistic ego transcendence, when it's the only thing that's considered for all situations, reminds me of my friend's saying about the hammer and the nail. When all you've got is a hammer, everything's a nail. Here are those 3 quotes. Your shadow will follow you all the way to enlightenment and back if you allow it to. Ken Wilber. And a spiritual life won't save you from shadow suffering. And also Ken Wilber, the purpose of spiritual practice is to awaken from the dream. The purpose of psychodynamic practice, that's shadow work, is to stop the dream from turning into a nightmare. 14 years ago, Ken Wilber actually published a video on YouTube assessing Eckhart Tolle's Power of Now, highlighting the additional opportunity that could be gained by including the shadow in any approach to experiencing the ever-present now. I've seen people with severe psychological issues, sometimes even those who have seen their parents murdered as children, and later on in life they've just been told to get over their egos. That's not right. It's not an ego issue. It's a shadow issue. It's psychological trauma. And so too are all the smaller, milder things, such as shyness, fear of public speaking, unwanted habits, relationship sabotage, negative beliefs around money, and so on. The third type of bad spiritual teachings is abusive or cultish teachings. I've had friends in 2 different groups which have been accused of abusive or cultish behaviour, and witnessed a bit of what's gone on there, fortunately from the outside. In one case, I read all 200 plus comments written by signatories on a petition that their own spiritual teacher should stop teaching. And writer Janja Lalich, best known as an expert on cults and coercion, identifies 4 common signs of cults. 1. An authoritarian leader, often charismatic. 2. A transcendent belief system, transcendent in that it offers you everything, past, present and future, and the end justifies the means of the group. 3. Systems of control, who you'll live with, whether you have a family, etc. And 4. Systems of influence, social, psychological mechanisms to put pressure on you. In such groups, the notion of free will is really just bounded choice, as Lalich calls it. There's only genuine choice with the insignificant things. The only realistic choice one can make is to stay in the favour of the group and the leader. Are you free to leave? That's often a big factor. It may seem on the surface that you are free to leave, but the practical reality may be that you aren't. So I said one of these 3 ways has a doubled cost in years, and it's this one, abusive/cults. If you lose years to an abusive cult, there's also a price in years for the recovery. There are people I know, they had the experience, and then it turned sour, and now they're talking about facing years of shadow work as they work through the trauma and the experience that they went through. This has echoes with the shadow itself, because if you have a shadow issue, while the energy of that is not available to you because it's shut down, there's also an additional loss of energy because you have to make sure you don't achieve the thing that you're not allowed to achieve, i.e. self-sabotage. And Ken Wilber's key spiritual message? The best spiritual path is the one that's right for you. So what can you do? Here are 3 things. 1. You need to develop your own critical thinking skills. Don't be simple in the sense of just accepting what you hear as true. Decide for yourself on each and every point whether some idea has merit. 2. Look out for absolutism and absolutistic thinking, or the failure to think in an integral, all-inclusive way. Absolutism is where one truth that has some truth is taken to be all the truths and everything else is disregarded. This happens a lot in spiritual teaching and in personal development. Above all else, reclaiming your full emotional capacity is key, because it's in these areas of weakness that bad spiritual teachings and bad spiritual teachers can get in and seduce us. Often, the more of an awful life people have had, and the more they feel they're getting behind, the more they're tempted to be seduced by the idea of shortcuts. So watch this video on how to have infinite emotional freedom, as that's going to show you how to reclaim your full and natural capacity to handle any emotion or feeling, so that you can see things clearly and protect yourself both from bad spiritual teachings and also from any other aspect of life that would seek to take advantage of you if your emotional capacity is compromised.